Welcome back to Basic Business Training, the course where we are looking at how to do our business, and this is the second course where we are looking at basic business principles for applying to your business. In this session, we are going to start on management. In the next few sessions, we will be looking at management and so many different things that enter into how we manage our business, from people to products to customers to the place that we are in and all of those other important elements in being successful. I want to start this session off by looking at Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 40, and specifically I'll be reading verses 37 through 39. And of course, we know that this is the passage where Jesus is being asked by the lawyer, who is my neighbor? And what is the greatest commandment? And so in verse 37 it says, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is similar. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself." Now, I find it very interesting as we think about this, and of course, we have talked about so far in this class that this is the great commandment, and of course, out of this, we get a social bottom line, and we are being encouraged to look at who our neighbor is and how do we love our neighbor. But I think it's interesting that Jesus' words were to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And I've wondered, why didn't Jesus say, love your neighbor as I love your neighbor? Why does he say, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself? Certainly, we are not perfect at loving ourselves. And certainly the way Jesus loves our neighbor is the perfect way to love. And so why is he not telling us to love your neighbor as I love your neighbor? And of course, I think that one of the reasons for this is that I don't know how Jesus is loving my neighbor. I'm not aware of all the circumstances and what is going on, but one thing that Jesus was pretty sure of is that we know how to love ourselves. For the most part, we are committed to our own provision, our own protection, and our own pleasure. And I guarantee that you would not be in this class if you or your family were hungry. You would be out looking for food. Provision is critically important. You would not be sitting in the class if you didn't have clothes to wear or shelter for your family, because that is a higher priority according to a hierarchy of needs that we all tend to follow. But we also know that we are committed to our own protection, to making sure that we and our loved ones are safe. And it's also very important that we have people who love us and that we have fun and that we are able to laugh and that we are able to share and be with friends, and that has to do with our pleasure. And so we have to think about that as we look at management. How does this relate to our business that we're doing? Specifically, how does it relate to our employees? Are we committed to our employees' provision, protection, and pleasure as we are to our own? Are we as committed to our customers' provision, protection, and pleasure as we are to our own? And so this is the challenge. As we look at who is our neighbor, we also have to look at how do I love them in a similar way as to how I love myself. And so we're thankful to have a Savior who reminds us that we are not God, we are not like him, we can't love as well as him, but we do have something to reflect on in terms of our own commitments to ourselves and making sure that we are fulfilling that for others. As you think about this house, the structure that we've been going through, we've worked on the foundation, and we've worked on the walls as we talked about boundaries, and we've looked at marketing. We just finished a number of sessions on marketing, and so customer satisfaction, people coming into the door, it should be wide open, and we should be knowing how to handle our customers. We talked about pricing, and we'll do a little bit of that again coming up, and then, of course, bookkeeping, and we did some of that in the last class, and we're going to do some more of that in future sessions here as well, going a little bit deeper to make sure that your roof is as strong as it can be. But management is now coming back to the walls. And in our class on boundaries in the last class, we made sure that we had good, strong walls. But now it's come back to decorating the walls and painting the walls and putting things on the walls to make the environment feel good and friendly and safe and good for customers and employees and the like. So we're back to some of the finishing touches on our walls. And I have some questions that I want you to think about in terms of what is going on in terms of management right now in your own business. And I'm wondering how many of you, as you are sitting and watching this, have employees that you are currently paying or paying on commission or paying on salary in your business. I would imagine if you're running a business that a good many of you may have some, and some of you may have many, and some of you are yet by yourself, but God may be providing a way for you to grow your business so that you can hire people. I wonder how many of you had to close your shop in order to come to be in this class, and I wonder how that felt as you locked the doors and made a commitment to come and to learn and to study as opposed to keeping your business open. I wonder how many of you left your business in someone else's hands in order to come and to be in this class, and I wonder how that felt for you. Do you worry about leaving the business open and in somebody else's care? And I wonder what your thoughts are about hiring and about employees and how big you think your business is able to grow if it's just one person. Is there a limit to your capacity, and is there a limit that you are willing to stop at in order to keep it manageable within your own sphere of control? I've heard many business owners that the reason that they enjoy owning a business is because they don't like to be bossed. Rather, they like to be their own boss. And I wonder if that's where your position is as well, if that's maybe why you started a business. And I wonder what it was that brought you to that conclusion. What was your experience with other people and other bosses? And now that you are the boss, what would you do differently so you don't fall into the same trap as those who frustrated you in prior positions? And so we want to take a look at the difference between a boss and a leader. And in your workbook, you will see a chart that's there, the difference between a boss and a leader. And I'm just going to read through these. A boss tends to drive employees, whereas a leader coaches them. Okay, a boss is driving them, pushing, forcing, being forceful in that. Whereas a leader is one who coaches and say, let's do this together, and how could we do this better, and let's learn. A boss depends on authority. A leader depends on goodwill. And of course, you can only have goodwill if you have also deposited that goodwill, and then it can be reciprocated. And so are you depending on your authority? I'm the boss. What I say goes. You don't get to question. Or do you say, I want to respect you. I want to hear from you, and let's work together to be successful. A boss inspires fear. A leader generates enthusiasm. A boss says I, but a leader says we. A boss places blame for the breakdown, whereas a leader doesn't worry about the blame, but gets to fixing the breakdown and then problem solving how that could go better next time. A boss knows how it's done. A leader shows how it's done. A boss uses people. A leader develops people. A boss takes credit, whereas a leader gives credit. A boss commands, a leader asks. A boss says go, and a leader says let's go. And so these are things that maybe you experienced in an earlier time of your life, or a time where you had a boss and you had somebody who didn't necessarily respect you or want your feedback and was more somebody who led by fear and through frustration. And so we want to look at, from management, from God's perspective, what does it mean to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves, still caring for the growth and the flourishing of the business, and how do we lead with the example that Jesus has given us? In fact, the Bible talks about the style of leadership that we have, and what we can come up with is the term you've probably heard of is to be a servant leader. And what does it mean to be a servant leader? The interesting thing about the term servant leader, of course, is that servant is the first word. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve and to do that service first. And then out of that comes the ability to lead. That person who is a servant leader is much different than the one who is a leader first. Being a servant first, having a desire to serve, to recognize that we want the flourishing of all people, gives us a different approach if our desire is to serve first and then to lead second. And again, in your workbook, you will see different characteristics of servants and leaders and then how they overlap together. And of course, a servant has the characteristics of listening, of hearing. They have the characteristic of empathy. They desire to understand what other people are going through. It's not simply, I don't care if you're sick, you get to work on time. I don't care if your child is sick, you get to work on time. But rather, empathy would mean that I need to hear and I want to hear, and how can we solve these problems together? Leaders, of course, have been given an awareness and maybe a bigger picture view of what is going on. They have the ability to persuade. They are able to conceptualize, to imagine some of the things and the details that need to happen for there to be success. And often they have foresight. They see into the future for what can be different because the business exists. When you take that listening and that empathy and you mix it with the foresight and with the persuasion and the awareness, then you come up with somebody who is a servant leader. There is a call for stewardship for a servant leader, stewardship of the business as well as stewardship of the people. There is a commitment to people in general because that is who we are here to have flourish, right? Creation flourishes, people flourish. Our business is to help people flourish, and we've talked about the call to help customers flourish as well as employees flourish. And so we want to be committed to people as servant leaders. And lastly, a servant leader is engaged in building community and sees that the listening and the empathy that being a servant gives you and bringing that into the focus of where this business is going helps you to build community so that you can do better together. There is a business organization that I know of. They're called Marketplace Chaplains, and I've seen some business people do this in different countries where a business is large enough to where they say that management of people is something as you grow and grow and grow, if God blesses your business to grow, that it's difficult to know everybody and to be able to listen to everybody, especially if you are the leader. And so they hire a chaplain, a pastor who can come in to listen and to learn and to love. And what they found was for those businesses who invested in a chaplain, that the turnover went way down. And we'll talk more about the advantage of that later. That attendance of the employees went up, and that overall the mental health of the entire business increased. And so those are things that if you are a servant leader, you're attending to and understanding in your business. Servant leadership itself is a paradox, and it requires constant balance. And so there's another chart again that I hope you see in your workbook, and it talks about the paradox of a servant leader being great enough to be without pride. It's an interesting thing to think of. There was a story of the little boy who received a badge from his Sunday school for being the most humble, and the very next week when he wore that badge, he had it taken away because he wore the badge. And he was supposed to be humble, and so he was proud in wearing it. But what we're saying here is that a servant leader needs to be great enough to be without pride. And so you want to understand that your greatness actually comes from humility, but that means you don't rest there. You need to continue to work that out. A servant leader needs to be planned enough to be spontaneous. You almost need to plan the spontaneity in order to help this community, that if somebody experiences a death or a challenge in your workplace, that you can stop and be able to say, it's okay, let's gather together and pray. Compassionate enough to discipline. There's a paradox right there. Sometimes we think that compassion and being a Christian means we don't want conflict, that peace is the number one thing, but sometimes people need correction. People need the loving a person speaking into their life for how they can be better and how they can be all of who God has created them to be. A servant leader needs to be right enough to be able to say that they're wrong. And that means that they have that confidence and they have worked hard to try to do the right thing so much so that when they are wrong, they can easily say, I'm sorry, that was a mistake on my part. A servant leader needs to be serious enough to laugh. A servant leader needs to be wise enough to admit that they don't know. A servant leader needs to be busy enough to listen. A servant leader needs to be strong enough to be open to change. And a servant leader needs to be leading enough to be able to serve. And so these are some paradoxes, and I'm sure that after our session today, you will be able to have some time to discuss what this means and where are those areas that you would struggle with. I know many of us struggle with saying I'm wrong. Many of us struggle to admit that we don't know. We have a perception that the leader or the boss needs to know everything and do everything and be right all the time, or it reflects weakness. And the idea that admitting you don't know is actually a sign of strength and of confidence is something that might be uncomfortable. And so it's good to have some discussions about that. And so we want to remember again that the purpose of business from God's perspective, and this is critical for leaders, is to provide the individuals in the community that with goods and services that will allow them to flourish. But secondly, it is to provide opportunities for meaningful work that will allow employees to express their God-given creativity. And that means that we want to pour into them. And so there are three things that we want to go through in this session. The first is we want to look at whether we are providing different opportunities for growing competence in our employees. As a servant leader, we want to ask, am I providing an environment that helps people in their skills, in their knowledge, in their spirituality, intellectually, and all of this relates to their competencies. The second thing we want to look at is, are they becoming healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous? And this has to do with their capacity. And lastly, am I providing an opportunity for my employees to express their creativity and their potential? And so those are the three areas we want to go through, and we will start with competencies. Competencies are really learned in three different ways, and sometimes we think, well, I'm not sending anybody to class, and so I must not be doing that, but there are other ways to learn. And the first is informally. Informally would look like what is described in Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 through 9. It says, and you must commit in these commands, repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And so as we think about informally, we are talking about the learning that happens by being around people who are competent. And so as you're spending your time around people who are competent, you might not even be realizing that they are teaching. They might not be realizing that they are teaching, but you are picking up on their habits, on the way they speak, on the way they do things, and that is an informal mentoring of sorts that you are doing. Modeling, playing, pretending, and simply doing are the greatest determinant to your competencies in life. And one thing we have to ask ourselves sometimes is that there are all different types of poverties that we might have. A lot of us, when we think of poverty, we think of financial poverty. And of course, we can also think of spiritual poverty. But the one that comes to me right now is relational poverty. And relational poverty are those people who might be coming to you as employees and they have not had a good role model who has taught them the competencies of how to speak and to interact and to work hard and to do the things that seem like it comes natural to us because maybe we've had that modeled to us our whole life. And so there's an understanding of an informal competencies that people may have picked up. The second type of competency that is learned is non-formally. And Luke 24, verse 32 talks about the men on the road to Emmaus after Jesus appeared and was walking with them. And they said to each other, didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us? And so non-formal is when somebody is actually teaching you, but you're not in a structured class where you're working on a degree. It's a non-formal teaching. And maybe you're providing some of those things to your employees by having trainings and workshops, and you are helping them build their competencies, build their capacity to learn, and to do their work well in these non-formal ways. But the last one is formally. And for that one, we look at Ezra 7, verse 10, which says, this was because Ezra had determined to study and obey the law of the Lord and to teach those decrees and regulations to the people of Israel. And so this, of course, is formal. And maybe you are in a place where you can help your employee to get some formal training. And maybe you give them some time and some space out of their schedule to be able to go to school. Or maybe you might sponsor them for a scholarship of some sort, something that's going to help build their capacity. And so that's one of the things that we want to look at is, as we have employees who are gifts to us, who are gifts to the business, we've been blessed to have them, and we also are to be a blessing to empower and to equip them. And so we want to look at that and think through what it is that you are doing. Are you taking the time informally to be a role model and to model good skills? Are you doing some or non-formal training, and do you have the capacity for that formal training? The second question we want to ask is, as a servant leader, are our employees becoming healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous? And this has to do with capacity. You can think about a picture of a lion facing off with a rhinoceros. And you think about whether that lion has the capacity to take on that rhinoceros. And certainly whether the rhinoceros has the capacity to take on a lion. And you can think about how wise it is for these two to face off. Because if you seize opportunity without the capacity, it's a waste of energy and a waste of resources. And it actually could be dangerous. So what are the opportunities that you have the capacity to take, but also for your employees? What are the opportunities? One of the things that we see throughout Scripture and in our lives, I think, is that increased age should lead to increased capacity. Job 12:12 says, "Wisdom belongs to the aged and understanding to the old." I like the saying. It says, "At the age of 20, I believed I can do anything. At the age of 30, I want to do something. At the age 40, I see what I could have done. At age 50, I wonder why I did what I have done. And at the age of 60, I settle down to do what can be done." There are some people in my life who are in their 70s and even 80s now, and they're sending me articles who are saying that scientists are saying and experience is saying that they are at the most productive time of their life. And it's a time when a lot of us are expecting them to sit down and to be more in the background. But the idea is that we have the capacity, we have at a young age, we believe that we can do anything and we're raring to go. And of course, we realize as we get a little bit older that yes, that enthusiasm and passion is good, but you really probably can't do everything. And you begin to hone your ideas, your skills, your passions, your talents, your gifts to what God has actually given you the capacity to do. And so we can read through that and think that doesn't sound very successful, but it's part of the process, and it's a normal process that we go through as we continue to offer ourselves to the Lord. T.D. Jakes says this: "Give a church of 100 people to a pastor who has the capacity for 1,000 people, and 900 more people will come. But you give a church of 1,000 people to a pastor who has the capacity for 100 people, and 900 will leave." And so understanding our calling. In the parable of the talents, there was different amounts given to different people based on their capacity. And so there has to be a recognition of who am I in that story and what is my capacity. I'm learning at my age to understand what my capacity is, and I'm starting to accept the fact that there are some things I just can't do, that I can't do very well at least. That doesn't excuse me from not trying, but I'm coming to accept that there are some things God has gifted me for, but not everything. And so capacity building requires intentional planning. Proverbs 21 verse 15 says, "Good planning and hard work leads to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty." So what are we doing to increase the capacity of those whom God has blessed us to work with? How are we helping them to understand better their gifts, to grow wiser, to grow in their experience? Are we sheltering them because we fear they may fail? Are we trying to do for them because we don't trust what the outcome will be? And it's risky. It's risky to allow people to do things, especially if you believe you can do it better yourself. But it's part of investing in the person and increasing their capacity to allow them to grow. The last question is about creativity. To determine where you might be as a servant leader, ask yourself, am I providing an opportunity for my employees to express their creativity and potential? And that is something that I hear very often from frustrated employees who just wish that their boss, their manager, would listen to their ideas. But rather, the managers often believe that they have the right ideas and they don't take the time to listen. And if God has given you somebody who is made in his image with the creative capacity of the image of God in that person, it behooves you, it's good for you to listen to them and to see what they have to offer and how that might work and even give them some time to explore that idea. And you'd be surprised that it could be a blessing for your business, and your employee will appreciate that freedom, that ability, so that they can grow in their competencies, in their capacities, and in their creativities. And so a servant leader will build an environment where others have the opportunity to grow in their skills and in their capacities. Focusing only on what needs to be done today misses the opportunity and the potential for tomorrow. Let me say that again. Focusing only on what needs to be done today misses the opportunity and the potential of tomorrow. And so that is something as leaders, as servant leaders, we don't focus just on today, but we are focusing on what God is doing and how we are joining him in his work. And the people that he has blessed you to guide and to lead, they need to also be able to see the potential for tomorrow. And we lead in such a way that that potential can be released so that there is good and positive growth. Managers tend to focus on operations, on systems and procedures, whereas leaders tend to focus on the bigger picture of vision and tend to be able to bring people alongside them. So there's a difference in the gifting of a manager versus a leader. But both managers and leaders need to be able to make things happen, and that does require power and influence, authority and accountability, as well as effective ways to delegate. So I'm hoping that you can reflect for yourself where you are at in terms of managing versus leading, in terms of being a boss versus a leader, and what it means to be a servant leader. There are 7 skills of management that we believe are very important for people to understand. If God has put you in the position of being a manager or a leader, these are 7 things that we need to know. The first is planning. And as I said a few minutes ago, is that the importance of planning and seeing tomorrow is critically important. And again, my tendency is that business people tend to be very busy and very hardworking. And sometimes we use our back more than we use our brain. We just are about doing the work and getting it done. And I believe if God has called you into leadership, you need to prioritize how he is calling you to lead. That means you need to structure time and to use your brain more than your back, and to have God's plan and God's vision for this business and what his purpose, his perspective, and his impact is for that business. So planning is, of course, a very important part. And getting input from other people. Planning does not mean that you are the only one that can hear from God, but planning involves other people on your team as well. From planning, then you go to goal setting, and that's number 2. What are the goals that you want to set for your business? And we have talked in the last class about goal setting, and we're going to come back to that again in a few sessions to think how to set SMART goals. If you remember, we talked about that. Goals that are attainable, that are realistic, that you can measure so that you can see success, and the whole team knows and understands these goals. Third skill of management is decision making. If you have a really difficult time making decisions, management might not be the thing that comes to you very easily. And sometimes we have to say, this isn't for me, or sometimes we say, we have to learn how to make decisions and have courage in making those decisions. And so part of being a manager, a leader, is having to make the decisions, because people do need that leadership. And there has to be somebody who is at the helm, especially if there's some disagreement, for how do we move ahead together. The fourth skill of management is delegating, and that is recognizing that you do have limits, that you are not able to do everything, and that people have been, you've been blessed to have people come alongside you, and so delegating to them within their passion, within their gifting area is very important, and helping them grow into those spaces as you delegate. Because the fifth one then is providing support. Once you delegate and you ask somebody to do something, you need to provide support, and that is part of those developing the competencies. You can tell somebody to do something, and the Bible is very clear on saying, fathers, do not exasperate your children. And I think as leaders as well, we need to recognize if we ask somebody to do something and they don't know how to do it, we have an opportunity and an obligation to teach to help them grow in their competencies so that they are able to do that. So we provide support. The sixth one is communicating, and that's making sure that we are communicating, that we are not only in an office, that we are not always on the phone, that we are available. And yes, it does need to be controlled, and there are different ways of making sure that communication can happen throughout the team, but communication is very important. Oftentimes, again, I hear people complain, and they're frustrated at employees that they don't feel like they can trust, and I ask them, how many times do you have team meetings? And they say, we're only 2 of us, or we're only 3 of us. We don't need team meetings. We're with each other all the time. And I think it's very important that you have team meetings, even if you are a small group, a chance for you to sit down and to talk about what are we seeing, what is the opportunity, what is God saying, and then praying together for that equipping. And the last one then, the seventh skill of management is controlling to plan. And that is, the first skill was planning. The seventh skill is controlling to plan. Sometimes people have good ideas and there's new opportunities, and somebody will come to you with a great opportunity, and you really, as the leader, need to be able to say, this is our vision and this is our mission for the business, and we will be talking about writing those statements in a couple of sessions here. But our goal, we have to control things to the plan so that even if a customer says, I really wish that you would do this, that you don't just run off in that direction. As a leader, you need to remember the purpose of the business from God's perspective and make sure that you are fulfilling that and following in that way so that you don't run off course into competencies and areas that are not for you. And so those are the 7 key skills of management. And when we come back in the next section, we will talk further about management and what it looks like to be a successful company, things that we need to be watching for and looking for. But I hope as you think through the session that you consider, what is God asking for you to do, and how has your heart been nudged as it relates to people who work with you, even if they're family members? How can you encourage them as an employee and not see them simply as part of the family doing the family business, but somebody that you continue to increase their capacity with? So may God bless you as you lead, and may you continue to be led by the Father as well. We'll see you next time.